that.
Madam Chair, nice coat.
Thanks. The white and the red, is that what I... Okay, got it. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask that roll be taken.
Buchanan?
Present.
Allen?
Here.
Dickinson?
Here.
Logue? Wagner?
The first item on the agenda is employee compensation. Oh, actually, did we take those off?
I didn't get it. Back. I think that just negotiations are expected to bring in that's about it. I don't think it has anything.
Yeah, next. All right. Thank you. And I would just ask that you be brief, since this is an item that clearly falls within the executive branch as far as negotiating or issuing any executive orders, and is not a budget item that we'll be acting on. If we could just make the presentation very brief, I'd appreciate it.
Corinne Martone, Department of Finance. We are, DPA is actively discussing with the 6 remaining bargaining units. They are at the table, and we do hope to have agreements by March.
Great. Thank you very much. Are there any comments at all from the LAO?
None that are brief.
Okay. Are there any public comments on this item?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Pat Moran with Aaron Reed and Associates, representing the professional engineers in California government and the California Association of Professional Scientists. Just want you to know right now that PEG and CAPS are in active negotiations with the administration. We understand the need for employee compensation savings, but those savings should result from collective bargaining. For these reasons, PEG and CAPS must oppose the inclusion of budget language that allows this administration or any administration, we oppose the previous administration's ability to unilaterally use administrative actions to cut compensation costs. This undermines collective bargaining and makes it impossible to negotiate good faith agreements. For those reasons, we're opposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? This is not, again, it's not an action item, it's an informational item, and I think all of us sincerely hope that through the negotiation process you're able to come up with agreements that mutually work for everyone and you know, move forward there. So that really, I have the draft agenda, not the actual one, so we move on to issue 2, the compensation reductions.
Corinne Martone, Department of Finance. Generally, the core health care plan is it's simply the addition of another option for state employees and retirees to choose if they would like to go into. The thought process is that it will be a lower cost plan to both the state and to the employees.
Are there any comments from the...
Nick Schroeder, LAO. We don't have any concerns with this from a policy perspective. We think that more options is reasonable. However, we do think that there's a risk that the governor's assumed savings will not be achieved because it's unlikely that the aging workforce would be attracted to a plan that offers lower health coverage.
Rose Villano with Department of Finance. There's no way of us knowing what will happen, but we have to at least make the attempt to try to offer a lower health more fundamental plan for both the state for savings and for the employees of the state of California.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on this item?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Pat Moran here again, pegging caps. We're opposed to this. We're skeptical about the savings that would be generated from it. At worst, the young and healthy will choose the core plan, and the older employees will choose the more expensive plan, which will cost them more and cost the state more. So we're going to have two separate plans, one for the young and the healthy, and one from the older employees who want a more comprehensive plan. It's going to cost more, and we believe the solution here is not to create separate plans for the young and the healthy and the older and the sick, but to reduce the cost of health care across the board, and we just don't think this will achieve those goals. Thank you.
Madam Chair and members, Dolores Duran-Flores with CSEA. We too share similar concerns. We think this is going to end up in a cost shift from actual employers to employees. We do see adverse selection as a significant issue here. We don't want to see a plan where you have younger, healthier lives in one plan, and all of the people who are older, who may be suffering from chronic health conditions like diabetes and asthma, who are suffering maybe from cancer, who have pre-existing conditions, and also families in separate plans, because families have to make kids get sick, right? So you need to take your kids in for to see the doctor. So we think that this is going to cause a significant issue for families, for older people, and people who actually need their health care, the older, sicker people, and they're going to end up paying significantly more. We ask for your opposition.
Yes, I'm Ken Merch with the California Association of Psychiatric Technicians, State Bargaining Unit 18. I'm just going to echo the comments of my colleagues here. We're just opposed to this plan. We think it's premature at this time.
Okay. Is there any other public comment? Members? Member Allen.
Yes, Madam Chair. If you look at the experience of local governments, cities, and counties with this sort of issue, it's been a very unhappy one where usually it does result in adverse selection, and it ends up eventually eroding the higher plans because so many of the younger people and healthier people leave the plans. I think you'd probably achieve longer-term savings if you actually tried to work with the employer organizations on all the plans, but not to try to create this separate, very low-cost option. The other thing, and this isn't for today's discussion, is that we could get significant savings in health care if we found a way of combining health care through the plans with workers' compensation. Because the workers' compensation health care system is usually expensive and it's duplicative in administrative costs. But that's way beyond today's discussion. But I do agree that from what I've seen is that you do end up in a very unhappy situation where you end up just really harming the higher tier plans. And you're better off working with them to sculpt what you have for what's affordable than trying to create this cost option that will send all your younger employees, because that's what happens. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions? The staff recommendation on this is to hold the issue open. So if everyone's comfortable with that, we don't need a motion. We will move forward to the next agenda item. We're moving to the Employment Development Department. As soon as we finish the transition, I'll introduce you.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and members. I thank you because I think you've been warned that I would take a minute or two before we went into EDD and DIR, because I'm, as Labor Secretary, these are both areas within the Labor Agency. And I will just take a minute or two of your time to tell you that bring a message from the governor that we mean to do everything we can to work to coordinate our activities and to work well with the legislature on all of the many issues that we face. We're in a very difficult time, and we're putting forth some cuts almost everywhere, including in this agency. We don't mean to. We mean to still train workers so that industry can be built in this state and come back. We're going to protect workers at OSHA and workers' comp. We're not going to stop doing any of the things that we're going to do. Hopefully we'll be able to do a little more with a little less and do it more efficiently. And I just wanted to assure you Those are the efforts we're going to make, not to stop doing essential services, but to try and do them a little more efficiently and with a little less expenditures, working closely with employees, with unions, and with the legislature and with the assembly and with this committee. And if you have any questions that are not of a technical nature that my staff are needed to answer that you'd like, I'll be here. Otherwise, I will thank you for the time and assure you that I'm available whenever and wherever you need me.
And for all of you who haven't met
sorry.
Mrs. I'm sorry,
I'm
Martin
sorry.
Morgenstern, who's the new Secretary of Labor, and we hope we have a wonderful working relationship as we move forward and get people back to work in this state.
Thank you. I'm not new to state government, as you may know, but somewhat new to this particular position and still be learning, but I just really hope we can work well together. I'm sure we can.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your taking time out of your busy schedule to come
Thank
spend
you
a few
very
minutes with us today. Thank you. The first issue on the agenda is the automated collection enhancement system.
Kristen Shelton, Department of Finance. The budget requests $21.9 million for continuation of the automated collection enhancement system within the Employment Development Department. This system is expected to increase and improve revenue collections by about $46.3 million during that same time period, so in 11-12. We are asking for the continuation of 49.3 project staff, and we are reducing base project staff for the old system, the legacy system, the tax accounting system, by 18 positions. So this is a net change of 31.3 positions. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them for you.
Are there any comments from the LEO?
Good morning, Madam Chair. Erica Lee with the Legislative Analyst's Office. I just want to point out that this project implemented relatively on time, and we are expecting about $18 million in revenue this year. Just wanted to say something good about some of the IT projects that are going on in the state.
So you support the request?
We recommend
Thank
approving.
you. Is there any other comments on this?
Just Greg Riggs with Employment Development Department. Just one quick comment is this is a benefit-based contract. That means that the cost to the vendor is only paid if we increase the revenue achieved from this specific project. So, and that is how the vendor will be paid.
It's always great to have performance-based contracts. Is there any public comment on this item? Do any of the some members here? Okay, second. Can we take roll?
Assemblymember Buchanan.
Aye.
Allen. Dickinson. Logue. Wagner.
Thank you. The second issue on here is the disability insurance automation project.
The budget proposes one-time funding of $38.9 million from the Disability Insurance Fund to support the implementation of a simplified and automated claim filing system for disability benefits. This is the continuation of an existing project that we bring to you each year for your consideration, so we can assess where the project is and what the appropriate funding level is. We're continuing 47 positions that were approved in 2010-11 and adding 16 new positions. When this system is fully implemented, it will achieve savings of about a little over 100 positions and $1 million.
And when do you expect the implementation to?
The implementation is happening in waves, but full implementation is going to be in 2013-14.
Okay. Are there any comments from the LEO on this?
The request is in line with the approved project documents, and we have no issues with it.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Just that this is a new system that will transfer us from a paper-based, old-style system to an internet and web-based application that will be accessed by both the claimants, the employers, and healthcare providers, and it's HIPAA compliant. So,
let me tell you, I'm all in favor of automation and providing better service to the people of this state. Is there any public comment on this item? Any comment or questions by members? We have a staff recommendation that we approve the budget change proposal. Is there a second? Can we take roll then?
Assemblymember Buchanan.
Aye.
Allen. Dickinson. Logue. Wagner.
Good. Moving right along. Issue 3, the unemployment insurance loan interest.
As you may know, the state has been under unprecedented levels of unemployment, and as a result, the state began borrowing from the Federal Trust Fund in January 2009. We have borrowed about $10 billion to date. We are in, unfortunately, quite a lot of good company, with 30 other states borrowing a total of $41.8 billion. As part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the interest on that borrowing was waived through December 31st, 2010. Absent any further action by Congress, the first interest payment would be due in September of 2011. The governor's budget proposes that funding for the interest payment, but we would do that through a short-term borrowing from the Disability Insurance Fund, which has a balance of over $1.6 billion. I will note that since the time of the governor's budget, the actual amount of interest that we are going to have due and payable is slightly less, about $60 million less. And the Disability Insurance Fund borrowing includes very strict guidelines and provisions that ensure that the repayment is made when the program needs it, and that none of the borrowing will affect the rates that are set for disability insurance.
Are there any comments from LEO on this?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brian Euler, Legislative Analyst Office. We have no issues with the proposal for the loan from the DI fund because the balance is sufficient to absorb the loan. However, we would stress that the legislature and the governor ultimately need to come up with a plan for bringing the fund into solvency.
No comment.
No comment. Is there any public comment? Any questions? Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mitch Seaman. I'm with the California Labor Federation, and we are neutral on this proposal. It's something that we don't oppose for a few different reasons. One, that the alternatives are likely worse. That would mean even deeper general fund cuts that would have an even stronger effect on our members. And we also think that the protection language in the proposal is good. There's interest that's guaranteed to be paid back as it is paid back over the next 4 years. And as the LAO mentioned, that this won't trigger any kind of a tax increase on workers. That was also key to us. But at the same time, it's not something that we can necessarily actively support, mainly just because, as was mentioned, it's not really a solution. This is a one-time stopgap measure that doesn't really address the fact that there's a structural deficiency here that we need to address, and that, for example, next year the size of the amount of money that we need to pay back doubles. And so that's another major concern for us. We also think that this highlights another key difference between DI and UI, in that this is something that taxes the first $93,000 of our wages, whereas UI only taxes the first $7,000. And we see as one of the main reasons that the DI fund is flush with money that we can then use to bail out the UI fund, and we hope that's something that everyone keeps in mind as this process keeps going. And just in conclusion, we're interested in whatever we can do to help the legislature convince the feds to maybe waive the interest payments for another year, or anything that we can do on that front. So, thank you.
Well, if you have influence in Congress and could get them to waive the interest, I think all of us would be very happy. And it's clear, I think all of us recognize that there's going to have to be a long-term plan for repaying the loan and bringing the fund back into the green. But at this point in time, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the consequences of not paying the interest are very severe. And so it's an obligation that we have to pay. I don't know if you can elaborate on that and just shortly in terms of what that is, or
sure,
so people are aware.
So first of all, I do want to tell you that the administration certainly is tracking this situation. We realize that this is a short-term solution, but we're trying to kind of borrow time, or buy a little bit of time before we have to focus on this. Should we not repay the interest, the state actually, the employers, first of all, would lose their full federal tax offset credit, and the state would lose its more than $400 million in UI admin funds. So it's a very dire consequence. It means we would have no funding or resources in order to process a significant number of unemployment insurance claims.
Right.
So,
and could potentially result in more job losses and more claims
yes,
if employers
absolutely
lose that.
And to process those claims, you would likely require significantly more in general fund resources to be able to continue to get benefits to those needy individuals.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any comments or questions by members? Is there a second? We take roll.
Assemblymember Buchanan.
Aye.
Allen. Dickinson. Logue. Wag.
Issue 4, federal extended unemployment benefits, the statutory changes for the 3-year look back.
Essentially, the proposal before you is the implementation of Trailer Bill to support a temporary 3-year look back related to the total unemployment insurance rates. It's necessary to continue fully funded federal extended benefit provisions adopted by Congress. This would allow as many as 500 individuals to continue to receiving these 100% federally funded benefits, and it keeps about $1 to $2 billion flowing into the economy, depending on where they are in their benefit allowance. Based on current figures, California is likely to, based under the current process or the 2-year look-back plan, California's total unemployment rate would likely drop to a level below what the federal requirements were for these extended benefits sometime between April and July of 2011.
Any comments from the LEO? Or?
We're supportive of a proposal to adopt a 3-year look back to avoid the loss of federal funding.
Right.
And one additional comment, Congress, when they adopted the last stimulus type of legislation in late December, had the foresight to recognize that many states would trigger off of these federally funded benefits. So they added provisions in that bill that states can adopt to continue these 100% benefits. So.
Okay. Is there any public comment? I think to simplify it, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. We just wanted to, Mitch Seaman, California Labor Federation, we just wanted to express our strong appreciation for the fact that you're taking such quick attention to this issue, that were this change not to happen, we'd see, we think a minimum of 500,000 people, 500,000 workers lose their benefits, with more to come should this not happen. And so we just wanted to thank you all very much for moving on this as quickly as possible.
And to make it simple, is that we have a 2-year look back in order to conform with the federal regulations for receiving extra federal funds to pay the unemployment insurance to those who are still looking for work. We have to change that requirement to a 3-year look back. If not, we jeopardize that funding that we've received and dig our budget hole a bit deeper. Correct.
Right. Those look-back provisions essentially compare unemployment rates, and if you stay in sustained unemployment rates based on a certain percentage, then you get to continue to have those benefits. And because we've been in such a high level of sustained unemployment, we won't have the gap that we need to be able to continue those benefits.
Are there any comments or questions from members?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for bringing this forward. Not only is it the compassionate thing to do, but also from the standpoint of small business and business, having this money keeps a lot of people out in the community afloat. So I thank you. So it's actually, to me, a pro-business solution, as well as helping out folks who have lost their jobs and are still unemployed. So thank you.
Unfortunately, we are looking at a long period of sustained high unemployment. This is just a step that seems to me to make sense, both for the individuals who are going to have a difficult time getting back into the workforce in the foreseeable future, and it's good, as you pointed out, as has Mr. Allen, for the economy of the state. So I'll move the recommendation.
Second. Are there any comments or questions? We take roll.
Assemblymember Buchanan.
Aye.
Allen. Aye. Dickinson.
Aye.
Logue. Wagner.
Issue 5, the Workforce Investment Act adjustments.
The governor's budget essentially held flat or didn't submit a new proposal for the Workforce Investment Act. We kept it at the level that was adopted by the legislature in 2010-11. And based on your staff comments, we certainly recognize the legislature's desire to review the allocation of the 15% Workforce Investment Act discretionary funds. Typically, by the May revision, we have really a full assessment of what amount of funding is going to be available from the federal government. So we would not have any objection to including budget bill language that would reflect the intent that no expenditure of funds is made until the legislature has actively adopted the 15% discretionary plan for WIA.
Any comments, Elio?
As Kristen mentioned, traditionally the executive branch provides a detailed expenditure plan to the legislature for them to review, but the new governor doesn't have a detailed plan at this time. So therefore, we would suggest that you guys hold off on approving funding for the 15% programs until you have a detailed plan to review.
Okay. I think that's essentially what this recommendation does. Are there any other comments?
No comment.
I don't see any requests for public comment. Any comments or questions from the assembly members? Do we have a motion? Second. We take roll.
Assemblymember Buchanan?
Aye.
Allen? Dickinson? Logue? Wagner?
Thank you very much. And our last item is the Department of Industrial Relations.
Labor Code Section 65 authorizes the Department of Industrial Relations to be reimbursed for certain mediation and arbitration activities. The budget proposes the continuation of one limited term position. This is one of two that was previously approved by the legislature. This is requested for only 2 years to allow the department time to evaluate the demand for services and make certain that the revenues to support the position would continue to come in. This is essentially an artifact of a prior general fund savings solution which reduced the general fund budget in the Department of Industrial Relations, and then for those local entities or private entities that want to utilize their mediation services, they would pay for that service, and this just would continue the staff to support the position.
Thank you. Comments?
We have no issues with the proposal.
Are there any other comments on this?
Good morning. Probably shouldn't have one. I just want to emphasize what Finance said. This is to maintain the effort to where we've moved a couple of the ancillary services of mediation service off the general fund. The core function, the core labor management mediation will continue on as well. So this is a part of a broader strategy to pay for those ancillary services. And we have the mediation director right here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any public comment on this? Any questions or comments by members? Assemblymember Wagner.
So far, everything seems to have gone smoothly. I apologize for jumping in at this point. I actually just have not a significant concern, but maybe a small one. We're looking for extending one position for 2 more years, and it looks to me like the revenue is not entirely set or stable. Is there a reason why we can't hold this for a while until we get some of that further analysis that was being discussed, or perhaps at best extend this 1 year rather than 2 until we get a little bit better sense of our budget situation and the funding source for this position?
Just a real quick comment. I think when we considered this request, we looked at the amount of revenue that was available and had come in thus far. We're confident that the revenue that's currently available and projected to come in will fully support this position for 2 years. There's a definite demand for the workload. And the department could speak to this more, there are a number of small contracts that are currently in process that will carry them through that 2 years.
If I may add also, the revenue just started to be generated July of 2010. That was when the regulation went into effect. So we've only had 6 months. We're already on target with our revenue. And this position actually is a revenue collection position, and it guarantees that we continue the revenue stream thanks to the labor and management community that's pitched in to help.
Well, it's very clear there are not enough revenue-generating positions, and I also think I've heard of several revenue-generating positions in my brief time on this committee that don't generate the revenue that they are supposed to generate. It does appear we will have new numbers. We'll have the May revise. I question the wisdom of getting so far out in front, extending a position for 2 years in this uncertain economy with this uncertain budget, tell me what's wrong with doing it for 1 year, coming back in a year with more numbers, and then reevaluating it.
There's nothing fundamentally wrong. It does make it a little more challenging from a recruitment standpoint, and for departments to continually have to come back. 2 years gives them a little more time and flexibility from that perspective. And since this position cost about $75,000 and we project revenue of $275,000, that will, even if it only came in this year based on the contracts that are currently in process, we would expect that it has enough money to sustain it for those 2 years.
Well, I heard a very cogent comment from Assembly Member Dickinson with respect to the last item concerning unemployment and how that's expected to continue. It strikes me that we really don't have a problem in this government recruiting people to come work for us. Certainly that's not been a concern that I've heard in any of the hundreds of positions we've approved over the course of the last 2 weeks. So we're having trouble finding people. In fact, we're not having trouble finding people to work in this environment. So, recruiting hardly seems to me to be a concern. Let's just approve it for a year, come back to the legislature with more information, more numbers, and maybe then we can extend it for 2, or it'll go for 3 or 4 or 5, and the concerns that you've expressed are ameliorated.
So you're already generating income, correct?
Yeah.
And this is mediation is something that is supported by both the business side management as well as employees. So there aren't too many times where we get that kind of buy-in and support in terms of a system that they want and that works. I understand your comment, but the unemployment, when you take a look at it, isn't in every field. I mean, there are...
State government, for example. It's not in state government.
Right, but
which is
even
really unfortunate, which is why our employee base has grown so much.
Madam Chair.
And the effect on the budget has been very disastrous with that growth.
If I may, I think the practical problem is when you have someone in a limited term position, they are going to spend part of their time looking for something that's got more permanence to it and more predictability to it. So, if you have a 2-year limited term position as an example, you avoid that for a longer period of time. It's just natural that someone who sees an end date coming to their job potentially says, "Gee, I've got to think about what I'm going to do, not just sit here and wait for that end date to come." So I think in terms of continuity and getting actually maximum return on the person who occupies this position, it makes more sense as long as it appears there's revenue to support the position, which is the indication thus far. It makes more.
So far in the first 6 months, we're tracking a $10,000 revenue each month, which puts us on a pace to at least make $120,000 for at most a $75,000 position. So we would not fill the position if the revenue were not coming in, because our budgets program would not allow us to fill the position.
Right, and good management practices would also dictate that a supervisor wouldn't let an employee spend work time looking for the next position. And so the fact that people will be looking on their own time for their next position is a reality of life and not something that we should necessarily encourage or from this dais say that we understand our supervisors are going to let that happen and suggest that it's all right. It's not. The employee should be spending employees' time doing the state's work, and on their own time look for their next position.
I don't think it's a question of whether it's all right or all wrong or somewhere in the middle. It's human behavior. And you don't have a supervisor standing over someone 24 hours a day saying, you're only okay. And it doesn't happen with all due respect. So
supervisor 8 hours a day would be okay.
Assemblymember Allen.
Well, the way I look at it is I think actually this is a conservative way of approaching it. You could have come in asking for a permanent position. I think from a personnel standpoint, another consideration is when you're asking for a limited term position, if it's less than 2 years, a lot of times you're asking people to move and to resettle. And so there's another consideration here. Frankly, I feel that if there's a concern that somehow the revenue isn't being generated or that our colleagues on the other side wish to review it, they can talk to our consultant, look at it a year from now to see whether the figures are substantiated. But to me, I think it's conservative going with the 2. So I'm very comfortable with what you're proposing.
Well, I just look at, over the past 2 years I've been in the Assembly where we've eliminated positions that generate revenue, which then just reduce our general fund more. Now this, we need to know, we're not using general fund revenues. We're demonstrating a savings, and it's supported by both management and labor. To me, that's a win-win-win, and I do wish we had more positions. I respect that we have an honest difference of opinion here, and whether someone is looking during their work hours or not, which I would hope no one would do in public or private sector. I have seen incidents in both public and private where, if you don't know your job's going to be there and someone else says this is a great employee and they offer them a job, you take it, and then you lose all that you've invested in the training and everything else and recruiting of an employee, and you have to take those costs and incur them a second time. So this is a limited term. It's not an ongoing position, and if we don't see the savings, then I'm sure, hopefully, you will be revisiting this yourself.
Just for the record, we aren't talking about eliminating. We're talking about extending. We're not talking about further recruiting or somebody that has to move to take this job. So, those concerns, I think, aren't really relevant to this discussion. We're talking about someone already in place, and are we going to just, kick this down the road another 2 years with a little bit of uncertainty with respect to revenue, or can we just dial back a little bit? I've made my case. I'm done. Thank you.
Good people can have honest disagreements, and hopefully we continue to move forward and work together. Is there a motion? A second? Can we take roll?
Assemblymember Buchanan.
Aye.
Allen.
Aye.
Dickinson. Logue. Wagner.
That completes our agenda. I think everyone's been recorded on all the votes. We're adjourned.